This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm absolutely delighted that Ambassador Kanwal Sibal has joined me. He, of course, needs no introduction, the former Foreign Secretary of India. Many things to discuss with Ambassador Kanwal. I want to begin, of course, with Canada. Ambassador, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I want to begin with some comments that you had also put and we had discussed in the past also. This seems to be coming to a head, this conflict between Canada and India, Ambassador. What options does India have going forward now that there's been a virtual breakdown of diplomatic ties? What options does India have?
Well, at the moment with Canada, we have little by way of options, in the sense that, almost the worst has happened. The diplomatic relations have actually, in fact, been broken, because when you send back expel the high commissioners as well as senior members of the mission, 6 on each side, there's nobody left at the high level to manage the affairs of the mission. No decisions can be taken. So this will disrupt a lot of things, especially visas for people who want to come here, for family issues, or students, or business people. So this will become a big hassle. Other than that, the channels of communication now have effectively broken down outside the diplomatic channels, because the manner in which Canada has misbehaved, has behaved most unethically and in unprincipled manner, by revealing to a Britain-based, UK-based journalist and the Washington Post the substance of the conversations that the Canadian National Security Advisor and the deputy head of their foreign office had with our NSA. You don't do that, because if as is reported, Trudeau told the Prime Minister at Laos that the 2 national security advisors should meet, and on that basis, Dovell met his counterpart and the person from the Foreign Office in Singapore. And at the end, as reported in the Washington Post, Dovell said that this conversation has not taken place. In other words, this is between us. And they have leaked it fully to the press. And in a way that belittles him, by saying that initially he pretended that he didn't know anything about Lawrence Bishnoi. And then he sort of quoted chapter and verse about this man and about his doings, and how even in jail he can be operational and stuff like that. So putting a key advisor of the Prime Minister in a situation like this, where you are effectively closing all doors of any rational dialogue with India behind the scenes, is amazing. And on top of that, they talk about the Home Minister of India being involved in some way. Now, this is preposterous. I mean, these fellows, I don't know how they operate in their mission, in their country, but I can guarantee you there's absolutely no question of the Home Minister of India sending messages to the mission. It doesn't happen. That's not his role, his job. It is against all ways that government of India functions, or any serious government functions. If the Home Minister has certain views, he will convey it to the External Affairs Minister. And if he has certain views which he wants to convey through other channels, he will ask the intelligence agencies to communicate. There's no way he's going to directly communicate to anybody in the mission. And this is the insinuation in the article. And then, of course, the question arises, assuming for a moment that they did intercept some communications. So are they now avowing publicly that they are intercepting diplomatic communications? At the official level, they are accepting that they are spying, which is totally improper. It's not done. You don't. I mean, countries do it. The NSA in the United States does it. But when this is exposed, then they get hold of the people, the whistleblowers, and deal with them, the way they do, as you know, whether it is Snowden or Assange or what have you. But here, the government of Canada is letting it be known that they're intercepting messages, diplomatic messages between the mission and headquarters. So it's amazing what has happened. But we have to then tolerate this for the moment, tolerate in the sense that we have to bide our time till the elections in Canada are over and a new government hopefully comes to power, and the Conservatives might behave more sensibly. As you know, Stephen Harper, who was Prime Minister before Trudeau became Prime Minister, actually worked a lot to improve ties with India. We even signed a nuclear agreement. We even signed a contract to buy uranium from Canada. Discussions on the FTA started. So there was a lot of progress. But this man has reversed all this because, to my mind, he's totally immature. Now, how do you deal with a person who's leading a fairly important country, but he's so utterly immature and wants to sacrifice a relationship with India? For whom? For a terrorist who's been declared a terrorist by the government of India, who's involved in all kinds of illegal, violent activities and the cohorts around him. So he's equating relationship with India and India per se with a person like Niger, and publicly. First goes to the parliament and puts India in the dock. And then more recently, he once again does that as if India is on a rampage and is killing Canadians or Sikhs, pro-Khalistanis all around. Assuming for a moment that Niger was bumped off by whomsoever, whatever it is. But it is one case. But the manner in which he's speaking is as if India is involved in a whole gamut of illegal activities, keeping tab on local Sikhs and post-Khalistan elements, passing on intelligence to back home, and then the RAW begins operating and engages in all kinds of violent activities. On top of that, he's not offered any evidence. He keeps saying that we have given evidence to the Indian side, and the Indian side says not a shred of evidence has been given, and rightly so. They say they're giving us this kind of inchoate, piecemeal kind of stuff, and then wants us to investigate our own culpability with regard to the credible allegations that they are making. And then the final thing is that since he has gone out on a limb politically himself, then for his own credibility, if actually he has some information, he should say that on the floor of the parliament or otherwise, say what it is. That will, in fact, make his position politically stronger, that he's not talking in there. He has got some substantial evidence in his hand, but a year and more has passed, and he's still engaged in innuendos and circumstantial evidence, etc., etc. This is a total mess from the Canadian side, but we have to live with it, as I said, until the elections take place next year there.
Point of two quick things before I go to my next main question, if I may, Ambassador. The kind of immaturity that you mentioned and this entire idea that you could leak, which is completely against diplomatic protocol, leak entire conversations, which are absolutely secret conversations upon which the entire practice of diplomacy exists, en masse to the mainstream press. This has happened before, that infamous video where Xi Jinping is seen chastising Justin Trudeau, saying we had a conversation and you leaked everything to the press. And this is not how things work. This is not how things can work. And then Justin Trudeau mumbles something and Xi Jinping basically just walks out on him. There is a pattern to this in Justin Trudeau's behavior.
True, very true. You're right. I had that in mind, the conversation that he had with Xi Jinping. So he's a recidivist. So there is something in his genetic makeup. I would call it some kind of a genetic disorder which he has inherited from his father, who also was cosseting and protecting terrorists. Despite our warnings, he did not do anything against Parma. And in 1985, Air India plane was blown up. So he has inherited certain prejudices, some certain ways of thinking, and some political calculations from his father on how to hang on to power. And he's making this an issue on the assumption that the Canadian public would be aghast at the fact that a Canadian citizen, however disreputable he may be, is the object of killing or violence on Canadian territory by a foreign government, and he's playing this up. And as I understand, I don't follow local politics in Canada that closely, but I understand that there are 10 or 20 people in his own party who want to oust him. And this move is taking place this week or whatever, was to take place this week. Therefore, he anticipated that by going public on the India angle to divert attention from there, as well as the fact that he was to appear before some committee in which they were to talk about foreign interference in Canada. And there is some tangible evidence about Chinese interference. And he wanted to, on which he would have been vulnerable. So he wants to deflect attention from that by focusing on India. Now, the other question which you haven't asked me, but which does puzzle me, again, I don't follow the political scene in Canada as closely as that. The entire Sikh population is about 2% of Canada's population. The general belief is that the pro-Khalistan elements are a small minority. They're the vast majority of the Sikhs, which I'm inclined to believe are in fact themselves are helpless because these people, organized people, combative people with money at their command and willing to use violence, they've taken control of Gurdwaras because Gurdwaras generate a lot of money. And the NDP itself, although Jagmeet Singh may be the leader, but if I looked at the composition of the 20 members or whatever they have in the Canadian Parliament, I don't think there is any other Sikh in the whole show. So this puzzles me. So why is the Khalistani element so important in political calculations, electoral calculations of the Liberal Party of Trudeau himself? If the belief, as I said, is that most of the Sikhs are not Khalistanis and their total numbers are small, and the NDP on whom it depends doesn't really have Sikhs, it has Canadians in that. So I think the problem would be, in some senses, much larger than what is purported to be, in the sense that either the Sikh community in large majority is sympathetic to these fellows, and that's why they don't stand up to them, and that within the Liberal Party broader circles, there is a strong anti-Indian animus. And that is what he wants to capitalize on. It's a bit of a puzzle. So I don't buy this argument that he's doing all this because of he needs the vote of the pro-Khalistanis. As I said, this is a bit of a genetic disorder that he's inherited from his father. There are certain way of thinking, his wokeism, his so-called misdirected liberalism, where he is willing to go in a certain direction without calculating the costs of doing that. At a time when India is generally being quoted, if I may use the word, or if not quoted, where countries want to open up channels with India because India is a rising power, they recognize that. And here it is, and here is Canada. He's destroying those relationships. The other issue in this is this. Canada is part of the G7. There's no reason why it should be part of the G7, but it's piggybacking on the United States. And we've had good working ties with the G7. We are invited to all those summits. And therefore, our participation in the G7 summits will become more complicated if you have a person like Trudeau there, and if there's an issue of that nature between India and Canada. Added to that, and the fact is that all the P5I countries are not part of the G7, but 4 of them are. And they are obviously very clearly backing Australia a little, well, Australia is a little less, but they are backing Trudeau. That also introduced a little complication in our diplomacy.
On to the next question, I want to highlight many people have forgotten what started all of this. Hardeep Singh Nijjar actually had been refused a visa. In fact, the Canadian authorities said clearly that the passport using which he had entered Canada was a fake passport. He then claimed to have married a Canadian woman, which authorities found out was married to somebody else. And the authorities said that this is essentially a marriage of convenience only done to try and enter Canada. Despite all of this, he became a citizen. How did he become a citizen? It's a question nobody has answers for. You mentioned Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father. India in 1982 wanted Canada to send back Talvinder Singh Parmar, who you mentioned. And of course, Talvinder Singh Parmar now went on in 1985 in the Kanishka Air India plane bombing. Now, there is a Liberal MP, and Liberals are again in Canada trying to reopen, even though this has been investigated twice and Khalistanis have been found guilty. They're trying to reopen the case, this time in a sense to propagate this idea, which is popular in certain gurdwaras in Canada. There was the Indian government which was behind the Air India bombing. This seems very sinister, Ambassador.
Well, they can do whatever they want within the hot house of Canada, and they will pay the price for it. But nobody is going to buy that. The RMCP suddenly has become, very credible as an investigative organization because they put on the dais two of its senior people to back what Trudeau was saying, but the same RMCP for 18 years could not do anything. And initially, when they were alerted about the activities of these fellows doing gun training and whatever else, they didn't take any action. It took them 18 years to investigate. Even now, look how efficient so-called they are. 1 year has passed, and the issue has become publicly so sensitive for everyone. And yet within 1 year, despite investigation, for 1 year, they've not been able to produce any tangible evidence. So what is this RMCP and its credibility, in terms of what it says publicly about Indian involvement? These are serious issues which are there on the table. But point is, if they try to change this narrative internally, they may do so under pressure from the Sikh community and the extremists. But that's not going to go anywhere because they're not going to be able to change facts on the ground which have already been established. And how would they go back to 1985 or before that to say that the government of India engineered it? And if the government of India at that time engineered it, the BJP was nowhere near the center of power at all. And if the whole thing is BJP, Hindu nationalism, I mean, in fact, a lot of this is happening because of an extreme hostility to Hindutva. But Hindutva was nowhere in the picture at that time. So it's all absurd. They can do what they want domestically. And we will have some counters to that too, because we have ourselves good information as to who was responsible for this and about Parmar and about all the other things you said about the man in which Niger was given a passport and visas have been given to all kinds of rogues, drug traffickers and gun runners without proper vetting. So many criminals have been allowed to enter into Canada, as our foreign minister has said more than once. But then, these countries think that they are a law unto themselves. They have this pathological sense of entitlement, especially a person like Trudeau, that we can do no wrong. Everybody else is in the wrong. And if we do wrong, there's an explanation for why we do wrong, because actually it's not a wrong. But the other chaps are malevolent and they do wrong with the intention of doing wrong. So no quarter can be given to them. And one set of standards will apply to us. And another set of standards will apply to these inferior countries and races because they are not entitled to the kind of benefit of the doubt that they invariably give themselves and refuse to give to the others. I'm putting it strongly, but there is an element of all this in the attitude that Trudeau and people like him have.
Yeah, to Ambassador, many people ask this question in the behavior also of the Five Eyes, especially in the behavior of the United States, including its latest comments, and of course the UK. Almost as soon as Trudeau was opening his mouth this time, there was already a bunch of Khalistanis trying to influence, British lawmakers to say that, oh, this is all transnational, curtailment and aggression and suppression and so on and so forth. Now, one of the points here is that some people believe that this is complicated. This is also part of a effort to, in a sense, contain, in some senses, the rise of Modi's India.
Yeah, obviously. And it is not without reason that the Prime Minister, in one of his recent speeches, publicly talked about foreign forces wanting to destabilize the country. And this theme has been taken up by RSS Chief Bhagawat also. But of course, long before the Prime Minister said anything or Mohan Bhagwat said anything, I can share with you what I was hearing from circles which are really policy making and who have a pulse on these things because deep security issues are involved. Long before that, the game plan of our friends in inverted commas in the West would be not to make Modi lose, but to somehow see if he can come back, but without an absolute majority. Then India and Modi would become more manageable. Otherwise, with the kind of leadership he's providing, his ambitions, his ideas for the future, India will become more and more unmanageable. And all these years before Modi came into power, and initially even when Modi was in power, things were not so clear. India was actually manageable, was being managed. So they're not used to an India which acts independently. They have it in their mind. I can tell you from my experience in the Foreign Service. Yes, I mean, I don't want to make a blanket statement. There are always groups and elements in these countries which admire India, which relate to India's past, its cultural achievements, its soft power, so many things. And you can see that even in America, a lot of Indians have become very important in the American political and technology system, which in other ways reflects that they value Indian talent. At the same time, all through my career and in most of the initial years, there's always been this feeling that we were a colonized country. And therefore they didn't have the same sense of respect for India. So that kind of feeling still probably colors the thinking towards India, that India, how can India be our equal? The country that we dominated for 150, 200 years and actually created this country in a sense. So how can they now be our equal? So that feeling is there, especially in countries like in Europe, if you like. In America, probably less so. But nevertheless, America has a worldview in which countries have to fit into America's geopolitical jigsaw puzzle. They have to have a proper place in that, and if they don't have a proper place in that, then it's a problem. And then they have to be pushed around so that they occupy the place that they want that country to occupy. It doesn't always work that way, but that attempt is constantly there, which is why there is this effort today to put India in its place, and the Five Eyes, which again is absurd if you really look at it. I mean, it's a racist Anglo-Saxon club. And why should it exist in today's globalized world where all countries are equal, where on the base of language and religion, they come together as separate from the rest of the Europeans and have so much mutual confidence that they share vital intelligence between themselves. And now this has come out more and more by Trudeau running like a little boy to the mother country, the UK. Oh, look, you must support me. Although, mind you, the British statement that came out talks about law countries following the law and things like that, but they haven't given any public support to the actual kind of charges that Trudeau is making because they have in mind the protection of their own bilateral ties with India. And Australia has always been more careful, and New Zealand has not accepted the Canadian version until there is proof, which means that they are proceeding from the basis that so far proof is lacking. It is the United States, and I was unhappy, surprised and unhappy at the statement that came from the State Department, as if we have to stand up each time the Americans want us to stand up, and asking us to talk to the Canadians. Why should we talk to the Canadians? Well, who are the Americans to tell us you talk to the Canadians? It's a bilateral issue between us and Canada. Why is the United States making it a bilateral issue between India and the United States? Okay, there is the Pannoon affair, but the Pannoon affair is separate from the Niger affair. And we are dealing with the Pannoon affair directly bilaterally with the United States. So why are they hectoring us on the Niger affair and asking us strongly to talk to and cooperate with Canada and in effect be answerable to them? And this despite the fact that we have made our position known, that these guys haven't shared a shred of evidence with us, despite, well, I can tell you I've spoken to our policymakers in this regard yesterday. And it has been confirmed to me that they haven't actually given any evidence apart from some insinuations. Now, on that basis, they want us to probe further so that we can inculpate ourselves sufficiently in their eyes. It's an absurd way. It's an absurd way of proceeding.
I believe that this strange American reaction is also, in a sense, repercussions of India, and allow me to be blunt, not falling in line as they see it on the Russia issue.
Well, yes, I think it might have been troubling them. But I had a feeling that after a lot of initial pressure, when they openly came and talked to us, talked down at us about our relationship with Russia, and wanted us to dilute our ties, including military ties with Russia. I saw that there was a bit of a change later because they felt that that pressure had not worked and they had reconciled themselves to it. To the point that the American ambassador here, Garcetti, said, to my mind, rather surprisingly, that we encourage India to buy Russian oil. So that was strange. And now Biden, in the joint statement that was issued at the Wilmington Summit, the India-US Wilmington Summit, copiously praised our Prime Minister and greatly appreciated the fact that he has visited both Poland and Ukraine. And in the joint statement that came out of the Quad, there is no reference to Russia. The language that has been taken basically revolves around the language that was agreed in G20. All the things about general principles are there, but there's no, the word Russia is not mentioned. So that would suggest that at the operational level, policy-making level, they have accepted that India's relationship with Russia has a very deep historical basis and it cannot be changed. And Jake Sullivan has actually admitted that it is for the long haul. That's not for tomorrow. They understand that this relationship has deep roots, but they want to progressively weaken these roots. But it'll take time. This is the sort of thing he's been saying. But it's also a fact, what you mentioned, that at the think tank level, media level, deep state level, CIA types, the academic world, they really haven't forgiven us for not following their policy towards Russia and maintaining a tide and meeting Putin and hugging Putin when he went there for the summit.
I'm going to come back to the US in just a moment, but I have one more question to ask you about the five eyes, so to speak. I was reading a lot of 19th century material about when America was a rising power and reactions of the British press, the French press, and British institutions, French institutions to America's needs, wants, desires, place in the world, and so on and so forth. Um, there are several parallels here, isn't it, Ambassador? This is going to be tough for India, especially if we head towards 10 trillion and then at 5 trillion and then a $10 trillion economy, continuing to double our per capita income, in the process. This is going to be a tough, process of rising, so to speak. And that seems to be not well understood, at least in the Indian public square. Would that be correct in your opinion?
Well, it's like this, that the manner in which countries now relate to each other has very substantially changed from the time that you were speaking of. The countries have become very interdependent as part of this globalization process. And even if there is an effort to de-globalize, it is on the margins because the kind of networking that has already got created in the economic sphere and in other spheres, communications and this and that, is far too deeply entrenched into the system to be reversed. That's one. The other is that Europe is relatively much weaker than it was in the past. They dominated the globe for a few hundred years, but now they are in themselves and in relation to others declining. Their demography is in a mess. The population base is small. More and more divisions are visible in the European Union, despite the fact that they have this union. And America still retains its position as the preeminent power, but now has to face the challenge of China, and now also the challenge of Russia and China together. And there are BRICS. And the fact that so many countries want to join BRICS is a sign of the times. They no longer accept US hegemony or Western hegemony. They want to hedge against it. So they're looking to the future. All this talk about multipolarity, etc., the West has to get reconciled to it. In fact, as I told some US audience day before yesterday, and said that again to somebody from America today, that you should value India because India is the bridge between you and the other powers who are challenging you, the principal powers who are challenging you. And we are in a position where we can moderate the hostilities that are developing because we have a foot in both camps and we have deep interest in both camps. Not so much with China, but certainly with Russia. And then we are a democracy. And in this battle, as you see, between autocracies and democracies, where the autocracies are getting lined up against US democracy, we, again, as a democratic country with a foot in both camps, can actually help stabilize this developing confrontation. So the point I'm making is that India's role, if they're enlightened, should be welcomed by them. Apart from the fact that the manner in which China operates, its goals, its ambitions, the manner in which they run their economy, their long-term plans to actually grab the dominance over certain key technological developments and critical raw materials and technologies so that the rest of the world remains dependent on them, because as a centralized government, they can have a long-term industrial policy in which they can force every part of the Chinese system to cooperate, unlike in democratic countries. So the challenge is going to come from there. So they need India, uh, need India. So that factor will always operate, and therefore they'll have to reconcile themselves with the rise of the Indian power, and then will begin to recalculate how they can benefit from this and entrench themselves within a rising India in a way that they maximize returns for themselves from India's rise, rather than those, rather than the rise of India benefiting what they might see as the adversaries of the United States. That would be an enlightened approach. So, therefore, to answer your question, I think we are not going to stop uh, rising or stop our efforts to rise simply because we are concerned that United States and Europe may not like it. We'll go down that road. Now, if they try to put a brake on, as you are suggesting that they could well put, then I think they have to calculate in whose interest would that be? Would it be in their interest or eventually China's interest? Now, if they think that they should actually continue to indirectly boost China and weaken India, then I suppose it is a Trudeau kind of a thinking and approach, which is not based on hard realities.
Glad we're on the topic of China, Ambassador, because I have two questions there for you. One question that I want to ask you is, in all of this Trudeau affair, so to speak, a key beneficiary, most people don't realize, has been China. In fact, there was going to, and it's happening, still happening, a major investigation of Chinese interference at all levels of Canadian government, right up to police stations in China, in Canada, which act as a conduit to get information on Canadian society and pass it on to China. Now, this investigation has been long. There's a lot of material that is coming out on this, and Trudeau was going to really face the heat from this because he's seen as pro-China, and all of this has really helped China, including even the US's statements on this, has really helped China. That's a bit odd that people are not talking about this.
No, it's quite clear. But China will be very happy to see wrinkles developing in India-US ties. Um, uh, because the entire thrust of Quad and Indo-Pacific and India and United States doing it more and more together, and China's actually very deep-seated concerns that what the US did in terms of building up China into the power today that it is, if it decides to do that vis-a-vis India, then it's a huge problem for China. In other words, investment, technology, this and that, shifting of supply chains, they are mortified at this prospect. That's why they get very flustered when there's a question of India making progress in this or that field, or the supply chains shifting to India. So China, therefore, you're right, would be quite happy if India-US relationship develop problems and issues, and if Trudeau can contribute to that, well and good. This will slow down India's rise, and if the trust levels get diluted, then it will affect some other areas of cooperation, and China would have a freer and freer hand. So that's very true, and that's why sometimes that marvel at the lack of a geopolitical sense in a country like America, which is full of all sorts of experts in their myriad think tanks who write very learned research papers on these matters. But at the end of the day, they seem to be committing very serious geopolitical mistakes. So I don't know where all that intellectual inputs and research and understanding of international developments, what it leads to in terms of actually advancing US interest. So they made this terrible mistake of building up China. And now, if they bully India as they are doing a little bit, the beneficiary is China. Now, what they've done in Bangladesh is, we haven't talked about it, but this is part of that thing, hurting India's strategic interests and helping advance China's strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific, where actually India and United States and others in the Quad are cooperating with the China threat in view. So there is such a discrepancy in the objectives of the Quad and the Indo-Pacific, and putting India in a bind with regard to security in the Indian Ocean, in our northeast, and generally hurting our efforts to develop our Act East policy. There it is.
I have one last question on China, and then we'll segue to the second part of this conversation, which is on Bangladesh. My question on China is that there is some opinion, Ambassador, that one of the deep-seated fears of the American deep state, in a sense, and you just mentioned this, that's why I want to ask you, is that they might land up making the same mistake with India, or will they land up making up the same mistake with India as they did with China? A rising, resurgent India will not listen to you will not fall in line, as it were, to all the diktats of the United States. And in a sense, if these two Asian powers can someday find a way to thaw their frozen relationship, it's not good for the West, so to speak, and not good for America. A complex set of insecurities and issues exist in the deep state. How do you respond to thoughts like that?
Well, India is whatever we are a democracy. We are open, we are transparent. They have the capacity to extend their influence in India in various quarters, which they have been doing. They can also try to affect the political processes in this country. If not that, which is more difficult, but in terms of society, influencing society in various ways through the social media, through the academic world, through the people-to-people contacts. In other words, the connections between the United States and India are such that India will not pose the kind of challenge that China is posing at one level. The other is that India has no declared approach or thinking or policy that they want to undo the past humiliations or their politics based on revenge. I mean, we did with hindsight, the absurd thing of letting the previous Viceroy of India become the Governor General of India and continue to remain in the Commonwealth. Total reconciliation with our past rulers. Where is the sense of revenge? Nobody is talking in India about any revenge against the UK. They don't want even to investigate the atrocities that these fellows committed in India. There's no research being done on that. So, therefore, and then the third thing is that China has a cultural mindset and a political mindset, especially a cultural mindset, which affects their politics. That they are the kingdom of heaven, they are the center of the universe. They have this thinking of hierarchy in society and nations. It's very deeply embedded in their thinking. India is very open. Is very open. And then China has cordoned itself off from Western influences. No social media, none of these big tech from the United States has access there. Google doesn't have access there. They are very vibrant social media within their own country, but it is insulated from the West. So they don't let the West condition the thinking of the Chinese people. And those Chinese whom the Chinese government send out as a matter of policy to be able to get access to information and technology and everything else. In other words, most of them seem to be the agents of the state. So therefore, to keep them in check, to make sure that they remain loyal to their own country, you have these police stations and everything else where they make sure that the local Chinese community continues to serve the interests of the motherland. And if they're out of line, then they should be told there's a price to pay. So if the West was to think in more enlightened terms about India and India's rise, and why India's rise can be mutually beneficial to both sides, then I think they should have a different approach. But if the approach is that we will not let any center of power grow, whether democratic or undemocratic, which can challenge US supremacy, then they'll continue to commit mistakes.
Bangladesh now, Ambassador, which you mentioned, there's been a lot of time has gone by since Sheikh Hasina left Bangladesh. Contrary to all the euphoria about a monsoon revolution led by students, in fact, what has happened in Bangladesh, if I may say, is more and more evidence surfaces every day, Ambassador, that the Islamists are growing from strength to strength in Bangladesh. The Jamaat are back, the Hizbut Tahrir is back, Ansar is back. Every malactor, as it were, in that society, as far as Islamism is concerned, is back in full strength. Attacks on Hindus have grown multifold, including in the just gone by Durga Puja season. And of course, as you know, some of us were, with slightly cynical minds, I would say, thought essentially Yunus has turned out to be a good face for the world, for Bangladesh. But on the street, on the ground, power in the hands of the Islamists are growing. Your comments, Ambassador?
Well, you're right. This is what appears to be happening in Bangladesh. There are these fellows who are there in every ministry in the government of this advisor himself. I was a bit surprised at this Clinton event in Washington. Yunus brought this fellow, whatever his name is, onto the stage and applauded the meticulous way in which the whole thing was done, to make sure there were no surprises and extremely well organized and this and that. So we made it quite clear that it was actually a coup. And then we've seen how the Islamists, Jamaat Islami and others, they are gaining more strength on the ground. And we've always known that at least 1/3 of simplified formula, 1/3 of the Bangladeshis were nationalists, 1/3 were pro-Indian, and 1/3 were deeply anti-Indian. So those 1/3 deeply anti-Indian now have a chance to grab the reins of power and to condition the society in the way they want. This is not going to trouble the West. After all, what happened if you go back in Afghanistan? They promoted jihad in a region. Frankly, there would have been no kind of modern kind of jihad in our region, but for the decision by the Americans to bring in Saudis and everybody else to create the jihadis to fight the Soviet-backed regime in Afghanistan. They were comfortable with it. We've seen how they have collaborated with as reports suggest, with the Islamic State. Jabhat-e-Nusra and all these organizations, they are known to be so close with Islamist organizations, close to Al-Qaeda, this and that. But they've been training them. The larger geopolitical objective of ousting Bashar al-Assad from power. So they have supported, as the Russians allege, the Chechens and everything else and the violence that took place there. And Putin still says that the CIA had a hand in that in order to weaken Russia's hold in the Caucasus, and from there weaken the Russian government and cause a breakup of Russia in the south. So it's not as if they have been overly concerned about Islamist organizations coming to power. And the latest example of that, and the most telling one, is that having fought the war on terror, having fought the war in Afghanistan for 18 years, having ousted the Taliban from power, they actually reinstated Taliban in Kabul and handed over Afghanistan to them. And Taliban is no better than these chaps you're talking about in Bangladesh. So if they're comfortable with that, and they had a dialogue with them in Doha for long, they're treating them as equal partners and interlocutors. So therefore, from our point of view, we would feel it rather strange that the United States should wish to actually encourage Islamism. But in actual fact, they have done that. And therefore, they're not going to share our concerns about the shift in power in Bangladesh from a relatively secular system to one that is more Islamist in nature. In Pakistan, I mean, they're not blind. They've seen how Pakistan has been radicalized over time. And during this period, they have, whether it was Zia or whether it was this or that person in power, they have again cosseted Pakistan, giving them arms and everything else. And even now, they're not closed doors to Pakistan. They gave them, they refurbished their F-16s, and now they are giving a few $1 billion through the IMF to Pakistan. And this is happening when Pakistan is getting increasingly radicalized, you can see on the ground. So therefore, our concern about the rise of Islamism in Bangladesh, following the ouster of Sheikh Hasina, is not a concern that the United States would share with us.
Last question then, Ambassador. Ever since we were students, really, we have always heard and we were taught this entire idea that India could one day face a two-front war. And when Naxalism was at its prime, there was talk, I remember, of a two-and-a-half-front war. Today, with Pakistan going the way it's going, with Bangladesh now going the way it's going, all of those worst case scenarios seem to be coming true. I recently spoke to a veteran, a retired general, who said, well, actually, think of it as a three-front war now. There's also China and so on and so forth. Talk to me about, as somebody who used to be our foreign secretary, how do you see this? How can India in any effective way counter this? Because this seems to be overwhelming.
Well, one is that we cannot shape our environment the way we want. No big power has been able to do so. The United States has not been able to handle Cuba or Nicaragua or Venezuela, what have you. Russia has huge problems in its neighborhoods. China, again, has not been able to handle the Southeast Asian countries. It has serious problems with Japan, and now some problems are developing with Korea. So one that there are certain realities which we have to face because we can't control those realities. That's one. The other is what are the realistic chances of China and Pakistan and Bangladesh together ganging up against India. Now, this can happen in a scenario where India takes steps which genuinely cause concerns to these countries about their own security. That means we take the initiative. Then, obviously, there can be a response from them. But we are not in that mode at all. Our entire strategy, rightly so, is defensive in nature. So that there is visible deterrence and more deterrence. So I don't think that we have to be concerned about the possibility of India taking aggressive actions, which will then recoil on us. The other is that other countries, despite that, decide to do that. They will not do that unless they see an opportunity in India, where there's a weak government, where there is turmoil in India, and where they feel that the central government is losing control, and therefore we can't move our forces to defend the Ladakh or in the Arunachal, and we cannot defend the Kashmir against the Pakistani intrusions if they make. And the Bangladeshis will not frontally attack us, but they can create security problems for us in the northeast by giving shelter to the insurgents as they've done in the past, which will then tie down our forces in that region and make the whole chicken neck thing more a matter of greater concern to us from the security point of view. So that scenario presupposes a weak central government, which then affects decision-making processes, and we're so embroiled in our internal issues that other countries see a problem. There again, there are always risks involved in such a policy today, because you can have a short-term advantage, but then when the country concerned, in this case India, takes hold of itself, then you are creating a permanent reason for a prolonged conflict. China, to my mind, won't have much interest in a prolonged conflict with India beyond securing for themselves what they want on the border. In other words, whatever their perception of the line of actual control, they have already more or less tried to fix that on the ground, except in some contested areas. So that beyond that, I can't see what they can gain in terms of attacking India more broadly. Pakistan has tried its hands in Kashmir now for how many years? So I don't think they will take the risk again. And Bangladesh would, even in a case of India, which is a bit of a disarray inside, you don't need much to deal with Bangladesh, frankly, on the military side. What will happen is that China will entrench itself more and more in the Indian Ocean, in our neighboring countries, pit them against us. The first thing the Bangladeshis have done after the change in government is that the Chinese naval forces have landed up in Chittagong, the first foreign navy to visit Chittagong port. It is intended to send a signal to us that if Sri Lanka was a bit shaky on this, although Sri Lankans accept a Chinese training ship again to send a signal to us. So this sort of a thing China will continue to do to put us at a disadvantage vis-a-vis our neighbors, and our neighbors will cooperate with them. Not, these are real issues we have to grapple with, but I can't see a government in disarray in India. Our deterrence will grow day by day. We've just approved of 2 nuclear attack submarines, which will put a little bit of a fear of the God in the Chinese, because we needed that as a real deterrence, more than the nuclear-armed ballistic missiles, which are okay for hitting the mainland Chinese. But for Chinese forays into the Indian Ocean, nuclear attack submarine is a very dangerous proposition for them. And generally speaking, we are modernizing our forces. We are trying to create Atmanirbharta so that we can rely on ourselves. The trends are positive. So if we can maintain peace on our frontiers broadly and handle these incipient dangers to us for the next 5-10 years, I think by that time we'll be strong enough to ward off any serious possibility of adventurism by any of our neighbors. This is the kind of scenario I think that would be reasonably realistic.
On a relatively positive note, Ambassador, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, for your time and explaining all these complex issues in great detail with us. Thanks very much indeed, Ambassador.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.